if this ever became legal in the United States, I could really see myself opening up something like this. At the time, Oregon hadn't passed legislation. It was a pipe dream, but the seed was planted. And then fast forward a year, Oregon passes Measure 109. And then so basically the exact center, and Measure 109 allows people to go to Oregon, to go to a center in Oregon and undergo a guided psilocybin experience.
Gabe Charalambides and Aaron Nesmith-Beck are the CEO and COO of ODYSSEY, the first legal psilocybin retreat in U.S. history. In this conversation, we explore the new frontier of psilocybin legalization and what it means for mental health and wellness in the U.S.
That is one of the ways that Oregon and Colorado are unique, in that this is a state-level regulated framework that is outside of the medical system. No one is coming to Oregon for fun. They're still coming for healing and for growth and for the therapeutic intentions, but you don't need a diagnosis. It's kind of the Wild West for both better and worse. There's a lot of limitations to the medical model.
The current model for how psilocybin is being rolled out is not deeply interconnected with the medical system.
There's this whole deep dive into okay, how do psychedelics work? What is the best way to facilitate these? You have a shamanistic way, you have the Western way, but the way that it's being rolled out in the United States, in Oregon, in clinical trials and research, is this very non-directive method, which is, hey, we believe that people have some sort of innate ability to heal our psyche, and then the psychedelic acts as an agent to really reveal a lot of that material.
Separation from the medical system comes with both pros and cons.
The actual service delivery when it comes to the medical model is also a lot narrower and kind of limited. And generally, I think it's good that psychedelics are kind of advancing along these different pathways: medicalization, policy change, state level legal frameworks, decriminalization. Also, if psychedelics were limited exclusively to the medical domain, we'd just be missing out on a whole range of potentially valuable things and leaving a lot of value on the table, so to speak.
Although psilocybin is only legal in 2 states, legalization represents a huge leap forward, with hopefully many states and lots of healing to follow.
I think just more people having psychedelic experiences is great. It's really simple, but I think that's what I'm most excited about. Just more people getting on the on-ramp or at the entry point and having their eyes opened in the various ways that psychedelics can do. Thinking about the downstream effects of that and the follow-on effects of, because for every person that has a great psychedelic experience and whose depression is alleviated or PTSD is cured or whatever, there's going to be a lot more people in their lives that are impacted by that as well. So that knock-on effect is really, I think, exciting as well.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Gabe, Aaron, it's great to see you both.
You too, Scott. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
My pleasure. I always, I love the vibe of a 3-person podcast versus just a 2-person podcast. I tend to notice just the energy of the container is a little bit different. So honored and thrilled that we have the full ODYSSEY team here today, or at least you guys. And where I wanted to really open this up is anytime I meet somebody who is one of the first ever or inaugural things in the world, I think it's just a really cool backstory to understand that. And I know that ODYSSEY was the first ever, I think, legal psilocybin retreat center in the United States. And so talk to me about how that came to be. What is the backstory of ODYSSEY?
Oof, it's a big question.
I know that's a juicy one, but maybe we could do the abbreviated, how that unfolded.
Yeah, happy to. And it does start, and I won't go too much into the weeds, but it does start with a personal story for like, well, why did should I get into that or should I just start it?
Yeah,
So
just
like,
give your quick personal story.
yeah. So my professional background is I was an aerospace engineer for about 10 years between studying and then working in aerospace. So professionally, very different background. And then the more relevant thread was, yeah, I just got very, very interested in mental health and psychedelics around when I was about 20. So it was about 14 years ago or so. And then dating back, I was probably traces. I think a lot of people who work in this field do so because of their own mental health stuff and how psychedelics played a role in that. For me, it was kind of battling lifelong anxiety and OCD, to which the first thing that was very helpful was actually Buddhism rather
Mm.
than psychedelics. And that just got me extremely fascinated with the human mind and conscious experience. And I just realized I could kind of live my life in a different way than just being anxious and at the mercy of the world all the time. And that launched me down this other path where I spent a lot of my time reading about this stuff, um, practicing it. And then I had my early psychedelic experiences, which ended up being very formative and some of the most beautiful and meaningful experiences of my life to this day. And that just continued this like the side quest, which was a side quest for a while. And then I just found myself spending so much of my time outside of work reading about this and learning about this and reading Johns Hopkins research papers for fun on weekends. And just realized that, I never did that when I was an aerospace engineer. It started to become more and more legit and recognized as a field. And so I took some time off from aerospace. This was back in 2019, during which Aaron was way ahead of me. He had already started up and he was already doing his thing. So I'm kind of late to the game here. So I'll let Aaron jump in after I finish this little monologue here. And then in 2019, took some time off. I was looking for my first guided therapeutic journey. I had done all my prior psychedelic experiences were lower dose in nature with friends at festivals, which are still tremendously helpful, healing, and beautiful. But I was pretty scared, to be honest, to take 5 grams and go inward and just close my eyes. So I was looking for for a safe, reputable place that I could do it. And this was back in 2019. And I'm a pretty sciencey type person. I was about to do my PhD in space engineering and just, very much influenced by science and research. And I'm like a cautious risk taker. So it's like, I want to find a place that I can feel safe. And to me, I found a place in the Netherlands at the time called Synthesis that had
Mm.
partnered with Imperial College, contributing to research, which very much spoke my language. So I went to Synthesis as a participant. I ended up spending a month there just volunteering as a trip sitter and got to see about 50 or so people come through their program. And it was, an incredibly wonderful experience. And you saw so many people come and have these transformative, magical experiences. And it was, it was overwhelming at times and intimidating and such a wide range of emotions that, again, Aaron has, seen much more than I have even. But I finished that experience thinking, this is amazing. If this ever became legal in the United States, I could really see myself opening up something like this. At the time, Oregon hadn't passed legislation. It was a pipe dream, but the seed was planted. And then fast forward a year, Oregon passes Measure 109. And then so basically the exact center and Measure 109, it's called the Psilocybin Services Act. So it allows people to go to Oregon, to go to a center in Oregon and undergo a guided psilocybin experience. So it's not a dispensary. It's not a product that you're buying. You're purchasing a service. You're purchasing an experience. So it allows someone to hold your hand throughout the whole process, from screening, dosing, facilitating, preparation, integration, etc. And so that was passed in 2020 and then only took effect in 2023. So as soon as it passed, my eyes went wide, and I started to dream and think about that. The seed that had been planted in 2019 could come to fruition, and I could actually open up something. And my goal was to create an organization that felt more approachable and more accessible to other folks like me who may be a little bit more science oriented, maybe a little bit scared. Psychedelic experiences are so different. And I think when they're also synonymous with a lot of other, things like energy healing and a lot of other new age spirituality, it can be a little bit off-putting to folks. It was to me. There is a very mysterious element to that should be, very, very much honored. But there's a delicate balance to wean there. And so the goal is to create an organization that would offer these experiences in a way that met that balance and just felt very approachable and safe and reputable to folks. So yeah, then we did our first retreat very shortly after it opened. And I can go into the nuance of the regulation and how it was very hard to figure out how the rules in Oregon were much stricter than in the Netherlands. In terms of how to run a retreat, where can you do it, how can you do it, etc. So it was this giant puzzle that we were playing for a while, but then we did it in September of last year as the first one as part of the movement.
Amazing. I definitely want to dive more into that, but Aaron, I also want to give you an opportunity to talk about how you got into this work. I know that you, as Gabe alluded to, had kind of opened a center in Jamaica, which is also interesting. So yeah, it would be cool to hear the quick backstory of that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, my journey I think has some parallels with Gabe. So I got interested in psychedelics pretty young. I was 16 when I had my first mushroom experience. Very interesting, formative, kind of eye-opening experience for me. And then kept exploring psychedelics through my later teens and early 20s. Tried MDMA and LSD for the first time. Continued to find these things helpful for both for mental health and also just like relationships and insight into myself. And towards the end of university, discovered psychedelic research and basically like found out that the psychedelic renaissance was happening and found that super, super exciting. And similar to Gabe, really dove into a lot of that research, started to read the stuff that was coming out of Hopkins at the time, psilocybin research, and also the MAPS MDMA research, and just found that really incredible and interesting and really, really exciting. And that there was this kind of scientific return to this area that had been so meaningful personally for me. So yeah, I spent a few years traveling after that and was kind of exploring things I could potentially do in the space. Kind of had a sense that there was like a big wave of interest that would be coming soon, and thought about different options, talked with lots of different people in the space, thought about potentially like getting into research somehow, going back to school maybe, thought about getting into policy advocacy somehow, or even like public education around psychedelics, which I think there's still a big need for. And then, yeah, ultimately landed on the retreat idea, I think in large part because a lot of these other areas are very future focused, tend to be very future focused. But with the retreat, we could actually just go right to the direct experience and start giving people psychedelics legally in a safe setting, and start doing that right away. And Jamaica at the time, and still is one of the only countries in the world where that's legal. Not exactly a loophole, but just a kind of like anomaly in their drug legislation. Psilocybin is not listed anywhere. So it's completely legal, mushrooms in Jamaica. And it was really a choice between that and the Netherlands. And for various reasons, I chose Jamaica. And then, yeah, towards the end of 2018, started working on that, started pulling together the pieces, scouting out venues down there, finding good mushroom suppliers, getting connected with facilitators who would become the facilitators we worked with on the retreat. And then we launched that in June of 2019. That was the first retreat. And yeah, we were one of the first psilocybin retreats in the world, legal psilocybin retreats in the world. There was one other retreat in Jamaica operating at the time, and there was a couple in the Netherlands, but really not very many. So that was very frontier feeling at the time, and pretty new and exciting, and kind of a little bit very, very different landscape than the Oregon landscape, which has been an interesting change for me, where they now, with the regulated framework and licensing and everything, and a lot of the efforts at the beginning were just finding and establishing these basic pieces of a retreat, whereas with the Oregon setup, it's quite different. A lot of that's in place already, and there's a different set of challenges, like Gabe alluded to, navigating the regulatory frameworks and everything. But In Jamaica at the time, it was like kind of blank slate. So just figure it out basically. And yeah, and then we that was my main project for the better part of 5 years. We hosted more than 300 people. Really powerful work, like huge learning process for me, huge personal growth process for me. Incredible to see the impact on people. And yeah, and then later was looking to transition out, and as we were chatting about before we started recording, ODYSSEY acquired Amon earlier this year, and then I've joined ODYSSEY as part of that agreement. So it's cool to be integrating all the learnings that we gathered in Jamaica into Oregon and soon to be Colorado and hopefully other states. And yeah, and kind of like shifting to what feels like the new frontier, which personally for me is very exciting. And it's kind of where I like to be, and I feel like I thrive. So yeah, it's working out well.
That's amazing. Yeah, you know, it's kind of a personal issue for me because I've had a lot of family members that I have, you know, encouraged to explore psychedelics, and one of the biggest objections that I've gotten is like, "Oh, well, it's illegal," right? And doesn't matter that 95% of people said that it's been one of the most meaningful experiences of their life, or that 87% of people 6 months later said the depression was better, or any of these things. It's illegal. And so like now this barrier is at least cleared in one state, and maybe other states. Are there other states that psilocybin the legislation has changed?
Just one, Colorado, but they will be opening most likely mid next year. So it's Oregon, their bill passed in 2020, and then it only took effect until in mid 2023 is when the first session was done, and then Colorado passed in 2022, and then similarly, kind of that 3-year delay is what it's looking like, and so the first session will most likely be this time next year.
Got it. Makes sense. And so like, what is this new frontier? Like, what is bringing this substance to more people, to help people in the United States look like?
Ooh, another small question. But
I'm
yeah,
good at
Scott,
those.
just one dovetailing on what you said before, like that is what we find too, where a lot of people who end up coming have been thinking about this for quite a while, but there've just been a couple of barriers that are now coming down in the United States, and that it's like, hey, this is now legal, and I don't have to go internationally for this, and this is all, I know exactly what I'm getting in doing this, and it's feels reputable. And so the more you can make this legal, safe, professional, local, the more people are going to realize that this is something that they can do. And so to the question on, what does it look like? So I can give like an overview.
Can I ask one question for you
Please.
on this? So for example, I know with ketamine, you have to have a mental, basically a diagnosis from a psychiatrist to basically legally, use that substance in a clinical setting. Does the same rules apply here for psilocybin?
No, good question. Yeah, and that is one of the ways that Oregon and Colorado are unique, and that this is a state level regulated framework that is outside of the medical system. So no one is coming to Oregon for fun. They're still coming for healing and for growth and for the therapeutic intentions, but you don't need a diagnosis. And so it's kind of the Wild West for both better and worse, in that there's a lot of limitations to the medical model. It does provide a lot of access for a lot of people, and I'm very happy that that's happening too. But Oregon and Colorado, it's really kind of up to the operators to operate this in a way that is ethical and is professional. But technically, as long as someone meets a minimum screening criteria, they are eligible to come for an experience. No diagnosis, no prescription, nothing needed.
So do you think that that is like disintermediation of the medical system, current medical system is long-term a good thing or a challenging thing?
Ooh, Good question. And yeah, Aaron, chip in here. I think we'll probably go back and forth on this one. I think it's a good thing. The medical model, it's going to be quite narrow in who gets access via it. So, like, take MDMA, for example, if that gets approved, that is going to be for people who meet the criteria of treatment-resistant PTSD, a very narrow slice of the population. And hopefully for those people, they have access to it and insurance covers it. So that would be beautiful. I'm so happy that that exists for them. And then similarly for if Compass gets this approved for treatment-resistant depression, then again, that slice of the population who qualifies for treatment-resistant depression will hopefully have access to insurance-covered versions of that. Depending on the REMS, which is like the risk evaluation mitigation strategy, basically the protocol for how this can be delivered, it might, like, oh, we're going to get a little bit into the nerdy terms here, but drugs can be used off-label, which means they can be prescribed to someone who doesn't meet the on-label passing of the FDA medicine. So if you take ketamine, it was prescribed as an anesthetic, but it's being used off-label for all sorts of mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, etc. We'll see whether or not that's going to be possible with MDMA and psilocybin that has been FDA approved. And otherwise, it's just going to be remain accessible only to a small slice of the population. And what's nice about Oregon and Colorado is that it really, you can access this for growth. You can do it if you have OCD or an eating disorder or a whole variety of things, without needing to meet these like very narrow criteria of the FDA approval process. And then the other point I'll make there before, Aaron, if you want to chime in with something, is that even if you can prescribe them off-label, they are often not covered by insurance. Off-label use of medication is often not covered by insurance. And, we'll see when the dust settles how much Compass is charging for psilocybin, but I suspect it's going to be in the many thousands of dollars. So access via the medical model for the majority of the population is going to be incredibly expensive. So, and then, in Oregon, the main costs are labor, which are consistent across the medical model and Oregon. But the cost of the psilocybin itself is always going to be radically cheaper in Oregon and Colorado and other states than it will in the medical model. Hopefully that was somewhat coherent.
And that's not because it actually, the cost of goods is cheaper. It's because we are in this system that a bunch of people just make money and jack up prices. If insurance is paying for it, well, then it's like the price of goods can be much higher, and it's just kind of this circular inflation thing. Interesting. Okay, cool. Makes sense.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think the actual service delivery when it comes to the medical model is also a lot narrower and kind of limited. And generally, I think it's good that psychedelics are kind of advancing along these different pathways: medicalization, policy change, state level legal frameworks, decriminalization. I think this is great. And then also, if psychedelics were limited exclusively to the medical domain, we'd just be missing out on a whole range of potentially valuable things, and like leaving a lot of value on the table, so to speak. And there's all kinds of different non-clinical applications of psychedelics that are really exciting and really interesting and potentially help a lot of people, that if we were constrained strictly to medicine, especially as it's formulated or constructed in the United States, then we'd just be missing out on all of that.
Makes sense. So high level benefits of this current structure or disintermediation is a lot more people can access this. The challenge is they have to pay out of pocket. In the medical model, insurance can help with this, but it just means that there's just a very small population that is actually going to be able to access these substances if it's tied to it. Why do you think psilocybin, ketamine, MDMA, some of these other psychedelic substances that are kind of coming online in the States, like why has psilocybin been something that could be separated, and it looks like these other substances less so?
What do you mean by separated?
Well, for example, like psilocybin, it's completely unrelated to the medical system. You can in Oregon, in Colorado, ketamine, it's like it is something that you have to get a diagnosis for, and MDMA, it seems like that is the case as well. I'm just wondering why psilocybin has been treated a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think there's two reasons that come to mind, and then Aaron, I'm sure probably the same, or chip in others. One of them is it's natural. It grows in the ground. This is a plant. Like this grows in the United States. This grows in numerous areas, and so this is something you could cultivate, and you don't need to produce in a lab. So I think just the fact that it's natural lends itself naturally, no pun intended, to this use. And in Oregon, they explicitly said, "Hey, let's do psilocybin only." And then Colorado said, "Let's start with psilocybin, but let's call it the Natural Medicine Health Act." So if things go well, we will probably see ayahuasca and possibly ibogaine and other plants added to the list in a few years down the road, 2026 or beyond. So I think that's a big piece. And then there's a certain amount of cultural significance or history that this was studied a lot in the past. It feels more palatable to folks than if you were to start with ayahuasca, which feels very unknown and probably even scarier, or ibogaine, or any of the other natural plants. So I think it's some combination thereof.
Yeah, I would say also a lot of the modern research has been done with psilocybin. Like most psychedelic research people hear about, aside from MDMA, PTSD research is usually psilocybin, psilocybin for depression, for alcoholism, tobacco addiction, end of life anxiety, all these different things. So definitely in the zeitgeist, and I think that makes it palatable for people and just more familiar. And then also, like Gabe said, the fact that it's natural, you can grow it, you don't need expensive or sophisticated lab equipment to produce it, and also like practical considerations around like duration, for example. So like LSD, for example, 8 to 12 hour experience, not very practical. Facilitators are not so keen on sitting for somebody for 8 to 12 hours compared to 4 to 6 hours with psilocybin. And then I think also like what was alluded to before, but ketamine by contrast has been already exists in the medical domain, and psilocybin has just never, not yet anyway, been kind of through that process. It's almost like starting fresh in a way if using it in these non-clinical frameworks.
And what does the federal legislation look like? Like, right now it seems like it's like state by state, this is coming online. There isn't necessarily, I actually don't really know how this all works, but like, is there some type of unlock where it's like, hey, every state can do this now, that happens at the federal level?
Short answer is not really. Right now it has to be state by state. And we're seeing a mix of both Oregon and Colorado just passed by ballot initiatives. So, which is, pretty cool way for something to pass, where just sort of the people are like, we want this, and it happens. The other way is it goes through the state legislature, and we've seen a couple of initiatives try to pass in California, but then Newsom has been turning them down for a variety of reasons. So we'll see if that does. I suspect that there will be a bit of a domino effect where it's like, hey, Oregon was the first, and then Colorado was really big getting that. And then, if California passes, I suspect you would see just a whole flurry of other states following. So I do think that there's potential for like a domino type effect. But it wouldn't be just like hey, overnight every state is legal, because psilocybin does remain a federally scheduled substance, as a Schedule 1 substance. And as long as that's true, then we won't see any kind of nationwide change. What would change is if it was rescheduled, if it became like a Schedule 3 substance and suddenly this was legal, or if it was straight up legalized. And then you could, similar to, in Jamaica or in the Netherlands, go to a store and buy it. Then that would be, a tidal wave of a shift. But it seems more likely that'll need to be state by state. But, a lot of people have predicted that within 10 years, most states will have some sort of framework like this.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far. If you like what you hear, let me know by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and responding with a comment around something that you found interesting in the conversation so far. In addition to these videos, I do a lot of writing on the exploration of consciousness and my own personal revelations in my newsletter called Consciousness: The Doorway to Human Evolution. To receive these updates and more, all you need to do is simply head to the link in the description below and you'll be added to the community of 20,000 plus consciousness explorers receiving weekly ideas and inspiration in their inbox. I look forward to hearing from you there. Now let's get back to the show. And one of the questions that I had, because, let's just say I might have a little bit of experience, is does the regulations determine the type of psilocybin, like the strain that you have to use? Because I know that certain strains can have create different experiences. I was curious about that.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Basically, Oregon's framework has 4 licenses that came online with it. They call one the manufacturer license, which is for growers, and they can choose to grow whatever strain they want. The critical next step, though, is that there are also licensed laboratories that test the product to make sure that it's pure and that we know how many milligrams of psilocybin and psilocin are in there. And so we're able to get kind of almost like pharmaceutical level of precision and accuracy and quality. But in terms of the strain, it's kind of funny because this is a very professional atmosphere and this is all very regulated. And then you have penis envy and all these like hilarious
Right.
Costa Rica blue monkey. And so there's still the same strains you'll find out there are strains that are being grown and used in Oregon, but they've just been verified that like, okay, we know that this batch of 4 grams has 25 milligrams of psilocybin and 7 grams of psilocin. So it is, there's some milligrams of psilocin. So it is, very, it's a combination of professional and also a little irreverent.
That's cool. Now, Aaron, I know you're kind of coming from a kind of more open legislation where there's probably lots of flexibility around what could be done in the facilitating container. What do you see as the kind of current biggest limitations for how this can be administered in the US that, just are not ideal?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think the Oregon framework, I think actually does a pretty good job of this in a lot of ways. And there are some requirements around the ratio of facilitator to participant or person, undergoing the experience that I think are a little bit constricting, or could be a bit constricting. But honestly, it's been another reason why it's been interesting to transition to Oregon, and also it's felt like a good fit is because a lot of what we were doing in Jamaica already has actually been implemented in the regulations, in terms of people having preparation sessions before their experience, and kind of there's an emphasis on like non-directive support from facilitators, and that's consistent with what's done in research typically. Facilitators are providing like a warm, compassionate, and supportive presence, but really not trying to interfere or direct the experience in any way. And so that's what we did in Jamaica, and that's what's being emphasized as well in Oregon, and that's what we're doing at ODYSSEY, and that feels really consistent actually. So there's no real way in which that aspect of things has felt restrictive. I know Gabe can maybe say more about this, but I wouldn't say that's been a big issue at all.
I think and I agree that overall they've gotten a lot of things right, and it does err on the side of even safer, like Aaron alluded to with some of the ratios, like participant ratios. I think the biggest limitation right now is that will we be able to do this on an Oregon beach? The type of setting that you can actually have the psilocybin session is more limited. And you need to do it in a licensed service center, and only particular types of buildings can be licensed as psilocybin service centers. And it's getting more lax, it's getting better, more interesting venues are getting approved. But for a while, it was just kind of these more basic office type buildings. which is like, it's nice that the baseline here is you can look at Johns Hopkins and they do it in, they try to dress up a little clinical doctor room, and people still have 95% of people still have incredibly meaningful experiences. So that's a good baseline, and we can just do better from there. But it has been limiting for a while in the types of facilities that can get approved to do this. But yeah, fortunately, we're seeing more beautiful, better venues get approved. But that's probably one of the main limitations. And there's just, at the end of the day, there's just like a lot of hurdles you have to go through to offer this legally. That it's like, you could rent an Airbnb and do this just as safely, presumably too. But so the whole notion of having a licensed service center, and again, it just comes back to like the facility that you can do it in. But it feels, it's I think it's like just a function of trying to do this in a conservative, safe way to start.
Yeah, it makes sense that there would be some type of like crawl, walk, run approach here. One of the things that I thought was interesting is that in just kind of the preparation for this conversation, there was mention that a lot of conventional mental health practitioners are actually not out of the gates just like well equipped to facilitate this type of work. And I'm wondering why that is, because I could see someone making the jump that it's like, oh, well, this person's a therapist and they've been talking to people about their problems for a long time. And like, oh, there's this new tool that's really amazing that people love. And so like, we're just going to layer this into our kind of existing offering. And that might be a little bit naive, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Aaron, you want to take it?
Sure. Yeah, I think at the granular level that it would be naive, or the sort of the level of the direct experience, in large part just because the degree of difference between a psychedelic experience and normal waking consciousness is so great. If your average psychotherapist or psychiatrist is just pretty unfamiliar with psychedelic states, and that matters basically, or I think it does anyway. So that's one reason that there's not necessarily a direct carryover. And then there's the kind of paradigm we're used to with medicine and psychotherapy where credentials are like both necessary and sufficient to provide care to patients or clients. And there's a different thing going on with psychedelics where traditional or mainstream credentials like don't really carry over in the same way, and are not, I wouldn't say, necessary or sufficient to provide care with psychedelics. And so it's quite a different paradigm. And part of the reason for that is because psychedelics doesn't only exist in the Western medical or psychotherapeutic domain. It's a kind of interesting crossover of those domains, but also spiritual domain and perhaps indigenous practices domain, and maybe some other domains as well. So it's like we're kind of working with this new thing that people don't really totally understand yet. And I agree with what you said about, or I would say anyway, it's naive to imagine that there's just a direct carryover.
And then and just building on that, a lot of our Western therapeutic mental health frameworks, whether it's CBT, ACT, DBT, all of these variety of exposure and response
acronym fest.
but they all have a plan. They're all directive. They all feel like, okay, I'm going to guide a client through a particular patient through a very particular process. And right now, the way that's and then we can get this. You could go on the whole deep dive into like, okay, how do psychedelics work? What is the best way to facilitate these? You have the shamanistic way, you have the Western way, but the way that it's being rolled out in the United States, in Oregon, in clinical trials and research, is this very non-directive method, which is, hey, we believe that people have some sort of innate ability to heal our psyche, and then the psychedelic acts as an agent to really reveal a lot of that material. But this is really, it's almost like the client does the healing themselves with aid of the psychedelic. And so the therapist or the facilitator's role is very different. It's not to direct the experience in a particular way. It's more to provide just a very safe, caring, professional container for someone to have their own experience. And so a therapist who might be used to like very directly engaging with someone throughout a therapeutic process, steering them, directing them, might have to like learn to let go of some of that and be okay with sitting in silence for hours at a time. And we heard of, I think there was some trial where they were actively doing CBT during a psychedelic session, which is pretty it's pretty insane.
Sounds like that person hasn't done psychedelics before.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. But I think that illuminates exactly kind of the risk there. And I do think that therapists are very well equipped to be great facilitators, and that it does just require some training and maybe some unlearning in some sense. But yeah, so they are different, and it's not like someone can just jump into it with no training and be a great psychedelic facilitator.
Yeah, the thing that's coming up for me is like, so many of these modalities, it's actually like, for me, it's like the space holding is actually a function of like a certain person's consciousness, really, like to the degree that their heart is open, to the degree that they're able to kind of put their nervous system into a state of relaxation and that's actually kind of gets, you kind of go be in harmony with that, as someone who is going through a healing, and like that's like a totally different vector than like, did you follow the protocol?
Yeah.
Like, did you follow this step-by-step process correctly?
Yeah.
And, I don't know that I don't know that we're going to be kind of with our instruments be able to test for that. But it's just been where I've seen the most profound experiences, that have been facilitated.
Yeah. Have some, experience with this, because we did some retreats specifically for practitioners in training in Jamaica, and a lot of that cohort was psychotherapists or doctors and so on who were training to become psychedelic practitioners. And we definitely noticed for some people in particular, there was like a real, they really had to fight their urges to intervene, like during the psychedelic session, when they were practicing sitting for somebody. And so it was interesting to see the kind of clash of paradigms there with like traditional medical training or psychotherapeutic training, and how that was showing up. Yeah,
I could see it being a little, jarring to the ego, right? Of someone who's made their entire profession off the concept that they were the one doing the healing, to now take a back seat and say, actually, it's the person who's doing the healing. It's like we live in this paradigm that says we have to go outside ourselves for healing, that's slowly being broken down. And all the people that have been all the people that have kind of been like the people that we've relied on, and there's a real existential crisis that is coming up for a lot of people, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think another aspect is just some level of comfort with one's own process, because if you're sitting for somebody, then a lot of your own stuff can come up, and being able to navigate that over a 6-hour period of time, and navigate that while also being supportive to the other person. I think that, for some people that comes really easily and naturally, and for other people it's more of a learning curve. So there's definitely this component to it as well, because like such intense material can come up for people when they're on psychedelics, and we all have our own stuff, so it's like easy to get triggered or whatever else. So learning how to hold that, I think, is a big piece as well, that I'm sure is part of the like lots of practitioners' experience already, but I think it does show up in a more intense way with psychedelics.
Yeah, and Scott, and just building on what you said, I think you used the word presence, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, I think that is one of the less tangible but extremely important attributes in a facilitator. Where I've worked with a variety of underground therapists myself. I've tried to engage in a whole variety of different styles of this. And one of the best ones I worked with, he was extremely experienced, been doing this for 20 years. He also was a therapist before that. I was surprised at how little he did during the whole process. But he did, I felt totally safe. He provided like this really awesome container where I totally trusted him. I felt totally safe. It's a beautiful area. I knew that if anything come up, he could handle it. But he did so little. He did so little of the whole process. And I had a wonderful experience. And I think that really does highlight, what great facilitation can look like, or doesn't look like. That was a very, formative experience going through that myself.
Wow, that's really cool. One of the other questions that's coming up for me is I remember with ayahuasca, I had done my first experience was very kind of secular. It was like cool music, somebody putting, administering the things. And then I did this shamanic journey that was much more ritualistic. Like we were doing all these singing the Icaros and a ventiata, if you know what that is, where you kind of get up and they kind of channel a song specific for you and all this stuff. And there was this basically the idea that the shamanic practices were kind of elevating and amplifying the experience. And what I'm wondering is, like, in this current model of psilocybin facilitation, is there room for that type of stuff? Like, is this just like purely a commodity service that's like, hey, like your lobby is your differentiation and your venue and like the people that work at your place? Or is there flexibility to kind of put your special spin on what the actual experience is like with the current legislation?
Well, a couple thoughts, and then, Aaron, please chime in. I mean, I wouldn't discount just how much variance there can be, even in this non-directive style. Just how much variance there can be in the facilitator. There really is a lot between screening,
Totally.
preparation, integration, everything like that. There is a tremendous amount of skill that can be cultivated there, and still sitting with someone, even in this framework, between someone who's is not great at this versus someone who's great, there is a tremendous difference there. So I wouldn't overly, I don't think that there's much of a risk of it being overly commodified for that reason. And I hope that, great facilitation will always be kind of recognized, and appreciated. I think over the next few years, it's going to primarily be this non-directive style. I think that Oregon and Colorado frameworks, they're technically, at least the current ones, are supposed to be non-directive. So if someone is practicing in a more shamanistic way, that's technically not endorsed. Granted, there is a fair amount of latitude, and a lot of facilitators in Oregon do identify as shamanic practitioners, and I imagine they're bringing some of that to their facilitation. So I would be surprised if we saw that in the medical model. I would be less surprised if we saw more and more of that as additional states continue to unfold.
And it, there are still people that are essentially practicing this, just not legally, right? That do these type of things. Like, and I'd be curious if you guys are aware of like any like psilocybin retreat busts in Oregon. Like, is that even really a thing? I don't know. I always kind of thought that was like fake news that would actually happen, but
like underground practitioners getting busted.
Yeah. Like, it seems like kind of like not a thing.
Yeah, same.
No,
I haven't heard much of it.
I haven't heard of it. I think probably the underground community is, I certainly haven't heard of any busts. I suspect there's even more activity in the underground community because, doing it above ground has more rigidity to it. And for people who don't care about the legal aspect, then they might find a cheaper, more flexible experience finding an underground facilitator. So, I've heard of shroom busts for dispensaries. So people who are just straight up violating all sorts of laws and just selling them at a store. But I haven't heard of folks in the underground communities getting raided or busted.
Same.
So, Aaron, were you going to say something?
No, I just said same with me. I've worked with a number of underground guides, and just anecdotally, I even heard, this was like maybe a bit of a game of telephone kind of thing, but one of them told me somebody they knew had even talked with somebody from law enforcement about this, and kind of they knew that law enforcement knew what was going on and just were kind of leaving them alone. So it was an interesting anecdote.
Yeah. Getting thrown in the slammer for helping somebody overcome depression
Right.
would be
Yeah.
pretty shitty. It does feel like we're in this interesting moment where like you can do this legally in the United States. And that just is something that a lot of people don't know. It's part of the reason why I wanted to have you on this conversation. It's like people just don't know that they can go and they can do this. Why do you think that is?
Good question. I would say that I sort of naively thought that everyone was just going to know. I thought that like everyone knew Oregon was happening, and that as soon as the switch flipped, everyone was going to be aware of it. And I think that the truth is that's not the case. And that there's still like just a lot of public education that has to be done. And why that is, I mean, maybe this just gets into like once something becomes available, it just takes time for it to become widely available. Like you can look at ketamine, and ketamine being used off label to treat depression. Like the first ketamine clinic to open, I'm not sure when it was, but it was I imagine well over 10 years ago. Could be wrong. I don't know when the exact date was, but it hasn't been until the past few years that's really come more into the zeitgeist, and people are much. If you look at Google search volume of ketamine therapy, it's exploded in the past few years, despite it being legal for so long. So I'm sure there's some analogy in just how are new technologies, how is new information adopted, disseminated, and it's probably just an education problem, and it's probably just going to take some time until it's really widely known.
Makes sense. And I know with like, for example, like other journeys and retreats, it's like always advised to be a multi-day experience. Is that the same with kind of ODYSSEY and how you guys do things?
Yeah. I think that the difference, I mean, actually, the protocol that we're using is pretty much identical to how Altman was doing it at their retreats. And it is very important that people arrive with time to settle in, get acclimated. Like the worst case is you show up the morning of, you do this experience, and you fly out the night of. That would be insane. That would be absolutely insane. And so you 100% need to provide time before the experience and time after the experience to like get into this other frame of mind and settle in and start to integrate it and not rush this. And it's just like a really, really deep process that warrants time, care, attention, and space around it. We certainly provide that. I think a lot of the international retreat centers will provide multiple dosings over let's say a week.
So this is a single dose usually in the United States. It's like one big experience, but multiple days, like kind of on the outsides of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And there is some flexibility, and we could offer multiple dosings as well, and then it just becomes a time cost resource trade-off where it's just like, oh, do we know that multiple dosings is indeed better than one? If so, how much better, and how much more is it? So if you want to try to provide the most cost-effective, efficient way of doing this that feels approachable to folks, and asking someone to take a whole week off of their life for this is a big ask. And I'm sure people do have these very transformative experiences doing these week-long retreats, but it's just a matter of finding the right equation here that combines all these variables in a way. Aaron, do you have anything to add there?
No, I would just say that I think having a full day after for integration is really, really important. And just seeing a lot of people go through retreats and seeing the ways that the experience impacts them, and then seeing how they are the day after, and the kind of landing, and like how like open and sensitive and raw people can feel after, really kind of drove it home for me how important it is to have space, and ideally not rush back into things. And even because we offer private sessions at ODYSSEY as well, where people can just work one-on-one with a facilitator. But if they're traveling into Oregon, we always really strongly recommend stay at least one additional night after your experience. Like try to give yourself a full day, if possible, to integrate and rest and recover and everything, because getting back in the airport and travel logistics and all this is just not what you want for multiple reasons. Like it's going to suck, and it's also not the best use of the neuroplasticity and all that positive after effects of the psychedelic experience. So I think this is important, actually. and retreats that offer like, arrive, trip, leave the next day are being a little bit irresponsible, I think, in that way. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I've always made it a like kind of a practice. To book a flow tank the day after, because I just feel like you can actually drop back into the experience often.
That's awesome.
In those environments. So,
hey, that's good idea. Good customer research for us. We can certainly package that into, because as Aaron mentioned, we have private sessions as well, and this is one modality that Oregon allows. That is not so common in international play. If you're going to go internationally and do a retreat, it's going to be as part of a group, like a big group. And it's going to be like, I think it is a really beautiful way to do it for many, many people. And then for some people, it just feels, this experience already feels crazy enough. And then to now do this, especially if you're trying to address some like really tough issues, to do this as part of a group might feel too intimidating, and or other things before and after.
Makes sense. My last question for you guys is, what are you most excited about for this industry? What's the most exciting thing for you right now?
I think just more people having psychedelic experiences is great. It's really simple, but I think that's what I'm most excited about. Just more people getting on the on-ramp or at the entry point, and having their eyes opened in the various ways that psychedelics can do, and starting to see that scale up more and more avenues for people to do that. And again, these different sort of tracks that it's advancing along, like we talked about before. So that's seeing the movement progress along the adoption curve or whatever is actually really, really exciting to me. And thinking about the downstream effects of that and the follow-on effects of, because for every person that has a great psychedelic experience and, whose depression is alleviated or PTSD is cured or whatever, there's going to be a lot more people in their lives that are impacted by that as well. So that knock-on effect is really, I think, exciting as well.
We are at, every year is the most exciting year in psychedelics now. Like, we are at such a cool time in this whole industry that we're going to learn about MDMA's approval, and then psilocybin a couple years behind that, and then there's a whole slew of other possible FDA-approved psychedelics that will come. There's Oregon and Colorado now. There's going to be hopefully many more states to come. There's just so much happening. And I think I echo what Aaron would say about just like, the knowing what this can do for one person's life and how much that can ripple out. And now thinking about this through all these different channels is so exciting. And then to be building a business in this, that we get to, like, this is our whole life. This is our world. I mean, every day is like, I'm just too excited. I'm an excitable person, but just like every day I couldn't be more fired up to be doing what we're doing. And just thinking about where this can go and where we're at in time is a really, really special place.
That's beautiful. Well, it's been a blast to explore this emergent, transformative industry that you guys are in. I'm incredibly excited myself. I just think, the ability for people to just touch this deeper parts of themselves and open their eyes to, perhaps more than they previously considered, is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I want to make sure that you guys have the opportunity to tell people about where they could go learn more about ODYSSEY if, what we talked about today is interesting.
Yeah. Well, Scott, thanks again for having us both on. It was a blast. To learn more, just go to our website is odysseypbc.com. ODYSSEY is, we have a spelling problem. No one knows how to spell ODYSSEY. So if you Google ODYSSEY Oregon Psychedelic, you'll probably find us, but it's ODYSSEY pbc.com.
Amazing. And is Ottman still doing retreats in Jamaica as well?
That's all been folded into the Oregon services right now. So no longer offering retreats in Jamaica.
Nice. Yeah. So Oregon it is, folks. You heard it here. Well, thanks again, guys. Wonderful to chat, and we'll see everybody on the next episode.